Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for availing yourselves for today's dialogue titled Lack of Service Delivery and Violent Protest. First, I would like to thank management of the University of Northwest and management of Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences for giving us an authority to hold this dialogue today, not forgetting the organizers of this event. This is a sensitive title, provided that service delivery protests have become a daily bread in our country. And there is no exception for the Northwest Province. And these service delivery protests, which are violent sometimes, call for our national democratic government to speed up service delivery pace. We are having 7 speakers for today's dialogue, who are as follows. We've got Professor David Milo from the Noordwes-Universiteit Mafikeng campus. We have got Major General Hupulang Patrick Asaneng from the Northwest Policing Department. We have got Ms. Nikiwe Nam from the Department of Community Safety and Transport Management. We have got Dr. Malite Kido Marco from the Premier's Office. We've got Ms. Kilebukhile Kusimile from Rise and Shine Development Center. We have got Lebukhang Mutlapedi from Rise and Shine Development Center, and Dr. Lusanda Juta from Northwest University. With due respect, I'll call upon our first speaker, who is Professor David Milo. Professor David Milo is currently a director of research in Mafikeng campus, Northwest University. He's a member of the South African Association of Public Administration and Management. He's an accredited facilitator for all qualifications of the National School of Government. His research niche is monitoring and evaluation in performance. Over to you, Prof. David Milo.
Thank you, Dr. UBC, for the nice introduction and for the invite as well to talk about this very interesting topic, service delivery and violent protests. Now, perhaps we need to start by looking at service delivery within the context of South Africa and within the context of a state. Why do we need service delivery? Why do we need services? Now, you realize that as individuals, we are not able to deliver, or rather to take care of all our essential needs. A typical example, for instance, would be water. Not everybody can afford to have a borehole in his or her yard. And therefore, we end up, all of us, being in need of communal services. And now, because we cannot do everything for ourselves as members of the public, we enter into what I will call a social contract with the state. Now, the reason why we have a social contract is that we enter into some kind of an agreement where government is promising to deliver services and members of the public are promising to pay for those services, to contribute towards service delivery, because government does not have money of its own. Now, what is interesting about this social contract is that sometimes government cannot or is not in a position to meet all the needs of members of the public. For instance, people say we need water. Government can make sure that there is a pipe, water, clean water in every household. But then at the same time, you also come across instances where the resources are limited. Resources are limited. You have natural resources such as water. If you cannot provide water because the borehole is empty, there's no longer underground water. It's a natural resource that cannot be available at all times. And now the social contract also says to us that we have rights as well as obligations. There's an obligation on the part of the state to provide for certain services. And in fact, if one looks at the Constitution of 1996, it outlines certain specific rights. Now, one of those rights is the freedom of expression. Now, the freedom of expression says to members of the public that if you are not happy, you can speak up. That doesn't happen in a dictator. We're in a democracy, and therefore we can be able to fully express ourselves, to raise our dissatisfactions when things are not going our way. Now, furthermore, when you look at the Constitution, it says that we also have the right to protest, the right to petition the state, the right to demonstrate. Now, when you look at research that is conducted in the area of service delivery and protests, you realize that it is said that South Africa is basically more of the leading country in terms of protests. Now, perhaps the question that we have to ask ourselves is a protest a bad thing? Now, perhaps we need to look at a protest from two angles. Protest can be a good indicator in a democracy to say that people are free and therefore they can express themselves in different ways, and the state is not going to exercise its iron fist on them. But at the same time, protest can also be an indicator that things are not well in a state, things are not well within a municipality, because people are unhappy. I think the problem that we have to grapple with in South Africa is the fact that research shows that more than 80% of the protests that are organized end up being violent. And that is the issue that we need to look at. Now, in most instances, you realize that people would go on the rampage, block streets, disturbing motorists from going about their daily businesses. And that's where we have to look at the rights versus the obligations. Because when you block a street, that motorist also has got his own right. Has got to go and attend a meeting somewhere, and you are blocking the street. At the same time, if you look at the protesters, one also has to ask oneself a question. Can we blame the protesters? Why are they blocking roads? Now, protests are mainly the culmination of frustration. People have made requests for specific services, for improvements, but nothing has happened. And ultimately, people take to the streets. But the thing is that as South African, we don't know in the main how to protest, because we cannot control ourselves once we are in the street. We end up with situations whereby property is being destroyed. You end up with situations whereby there is looting of local shops. You come across instances where our roads across the province of Northwest and generally in South Africa have got scars. Because when you burn a tire on tar, that is going to lead to a pothole in a few days' time. Now, what it also says that is that we're moving 3 steps forward, and then we take 2 steps backwards. Because when we destroy what belongs to the state, ultimately it means that as members of the public, we are going to foot the bill. Now, as we foot the bill, we are forgetful of the fact that we should be progressing. The amount of money that is used to repair public property that is being damaged is actually the money that could have been used to develop a totally new infrastructure. Now, that is one thing that perhaps members of the public are forgetting when they protest. But again, at the same time, as I've indicated, this is sheer frustration. Sheer frustration because of lack of resources. Now, the Constitution says that other rights that are there in terms of individuals and members of the public would be the right to water, the right to food, the right to social security. Now, while the Constitution is outlining all these rights, the state would not be able to satisfy all these rights overnight. Now, the state will progressively try to satisfy these rights. And in some instances, members of the public are a bit impatient. Sometimes it is understandable. And sometimes people are angry at government for what they see. I mean, if you look at the revelations that are before the Zondo Commission, the levels of corruption. Now, members of the public are saying, we are paying taxes for this government, and the money that is supposed to be helping us to get water, streets, lights at night, that money is then being diverted for something else, to fill up the pockets of other people. So sometimes while one cannot condone violent protests, but one would also not entirely blame members of the public. And that is why I'm talking about the rights as well as obligations. The obligation on the part of members of the public is to make sure that the protests are peaceful. Now, one aspect that is not being fully used in South Africa is the signing of petitions. the signing of petitions and submission of petitions to the offices of the mayor, to the ministers, to the MACs, to the premier as well. That is also another powerful tool that we can use instead of going into the street and disrupting the flow of traffic and endangering the lives of other members of the public as well. So it means that all in all, we need to educate each other as members of the public, and perhaps the obligation is on us as the tertiary institutions to educate members of the public about their rights as well as obligations in as far as the protests are concerned. Because protests have always been there. In 1956, we saw women marching to the Union building to protest about the past laws. In 1976, we have seen the youth protesting as well. In this province as well, we have also seen a number of protests that have taken place. So it means that even in the future, we can still expect a lot of protests to be taking place. But what is important is that these protests need to be managed. They need to be orderly. And ultimately, we are going to enjoy the fruit of democracy, because it is a right that we have to exercise. But perhaps when one talks about the obligations, one also have to look at politicians as well as government officials. Politicians, they are more the guardians. They are more people who are looking after public funds. And their obligation is to make sure that every cent that is collected through the tax system is used for the benefit of members of the public. Politicians also have got an obligation to go back to members of the public and say, these are services that we cannot deliver because of the following reason. And that is why it is important for us to make sure that there is public accountability in South Africa. And that is what is happening in Parliament, in the provincial legislature, as well as municipal council. Politicians need to account to members of the public. But then at the same time, you also come across another problem on the part of members of the public, that while politicians want to reach out to members of the public through some kind of public participation, you also have citizen apathy, where members of the public are being invited to come to meetings, they don't come. Now, when you look at municipalities in South Africa and you look at the legislation, you realize that we have a document called the IDP. The IDP, or what is known as the Integrated Development Planning. The Integrated Development Planning says that municipality need to invite members of the public to make inputs regarding the planning for the municipality for the next 5 years. But if you invite members of the public and they're not coming, it implies that you're going to plan with a few members of the public. And the key word here is planning with the people and not planning for the people. Now, planning with the people, it means that you go to the grassroots. You try and understand what the villagers want. And then you put their needs, you package them nicely in the form of an integrated development plan. You review that integrated development plan periodically. And you also give account to members of the public in terms of your successes as well as failures. Now, if we have a much more vigilant society, You then realize that people will go to meetings when the councillors are calling them. People will go to meetings when there is an MB by the mayor or the premier within the province. And then they would get feedback in terms of what is it that we have been able to do well, and what are the problems that we have encountered thus far in terms of the utilization of the resources. Remember what I said was that we have a permanent problem of the scarcity of resources. Even the so-called first world countries, they do not have the money to do everything. And therefore it means that you have to prioritize. Now, when you prioritize and you talk to members of the public, they are likely to be able to understand the problems as well as the issues that you are having as the government. But perhaps what is important is the issue of civic education. Civic education could be undertaken by us as universities. It could be the work that is being undertaken by NGOs. It could be the work that is being undertaken by individuals within the communities. But most importantly, the councillors, they also need to keep on talking to members of the public about the challenges that they are having. Now, perhaps another aspect that we need to look into is what politicians say during or prior the elections. Now, when politicians want to get as many votes as possible, they go out there and they make a lot of promises. Now, if a local councillor or somebody who is looking to be voted in as a councillor makes promises to provide water, tarred roads and all. Now this person, once he or she is elected into office, chances are that members of the public will go back to this person and say, you have promised us A, B, C, and D. Now, can you deliver? Now, it means that we need to, or councillors, prospective councillors as well as politicians, need to be responsible in terms of what they package into their electioneering programs. Because what you promise, you should be able to ultimately deliver to members of the public. Now, I think that's where I'll end, and we can then have an interaction amongst ourselves as well as the audience. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Professor Milo, for your good presentation on the rights and obligations of the state and the citizens. I really believe that if we academics can educate community members on the consequences of destroying properties during service delivery protest, that might help, because in most instances, protesters are not aware that should they become arrested and have criminal cases, it's going to take them almost 10 years to get an expungement from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. With that in mind, on the side of the state, I also do agree with you that our politicians need to be accountable for their promises that they made during the election campaigns. Our next speaker is Major General Kupulang Patrick Asaneng, who's a Deputy Provincial Commissioner of Policing in the Northwest Province.
No, thank you very much. Maybe for starters, it is important to point out that when one speaks about protests, we need to first understand that the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa makes provision for people to exercise their rights. And in doing so, the public are allowed, particularly when one looks at Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Republic, the Bill of Rights. Particular reference here is made to sections 16, 17, and 18 of the Constitution. People are allowed to exercise their rights by means of protest, pickets. But what is disturbing is that even though this is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution under the Bill of Rights, as the South African Police Service, we are from time to time called upon to police what one can refer to as violent protests. And in the main, these protests are within what one can refer to as the local government sphere. And the protests in this space have come to be defined in what we refer to as a uniquely South African phrase, which is service delivery protests. This phrase seems to suggest that people are protesting because they are getting services, which actually is the opposite of what is happening. And that is why I am saying in the main, it's in the public or local government sphere of government, where people are not receiving basic services like water, shelter, and electricity. Now, the South African Police Service is by law, maybe I should mention the South African Police Service Act of 1996, as well as the Interim Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Section 218, enjoined and expected to establish a public order policing unit that would deal with the maintenance of public order. The establishment of this particular unit is informed by Section 205, subsection 3, that outlines the objects or the purpose of policing. You would understand that in terms of Section 205, subsection 3 of the Constitution of the Republic, the South African Police Service is established to prevent, combat, investigate crime, as well as to maintain public order and to protect all inhabitants of the Republic, as well as their property. Now, it becomes a worrying factor to us as the police to see that when people have to exercise their right, or when people have to get access to services that they are duly entitled to, they have to resort to violence in order to access those services or to exercise their right. Now, it is for this particular purpose that the public order policing unit has been established. What is also of concern to us as the South African Police Service is that in dealing with these protests, which are in the main violent, the scarce policing resources that should be used in the main to combat, investigate acts of criminality are diverted towards addressing what we call core objects diversions. Because in a well-functioning, well-structured government, particularly local government, there won't be any need for people to resort to violence in order for them to access basic services. It is in this realization that the top management of the South African Police Service came to a conclusion that in dealing with violent protests, those members who are called upon to do this type of service or work needs specialized training. That is why a directive or national instruction was developed in 2014 to make sure that members of the public order policing unit who are called upon to deal with protests, not necessarily violent protests, but protests, adopt particular standard operating procedures or guidelines. And one of the key elements of this national instruction or standard operating procedure is a proactive identification or proactive conflict resolution stance. What we are doing is through our crime intelligence, through our information office, we make sure that we identify flashpoints or hotspots, and then we proactively inform the relevant spheres, be it in the labor or government section, about the impending or the pending protests and the potential of such protests turning into violence. We have seen, as and when we are called upon to deal with the maintenance of public order, people who are engaging in these violent protests always are saying it is only when they resort to violence that government in particular starts to pay attention and to listen. And unfortunately, then it is often the police who are left to deal with this, and it ends up sometimes in incidents like the now infamous Marikana and others. So from a policing point of view, we would really wish and find ourselves in a situation where people will be allowed to exercise their right to protests as enshrined in the Constitution without necessarily resorting to violence. And the number of protests that we are dealing with every year, year in, year out, shows that the levels of delivery of basic services is not improving. That is the unfortunate part. And from time to time, through structures like the Provincial Joint and Intelligence Security Committee, we are engaging with government, municipalities, and everybody to educate them, to talk to them, to make sure that issues of protests are done in a peaceful, acceptable, and constitutional manner, because we don't want a situation where there is a confrontation between the police and the communities that they are supposed to serve. In conclusion, it is important that one should make an appeal not only to the general public and the communities in our province, but also local government, ward councillors, municipal officials, that it is only where people are engaged, they are informed about what is due and what is happening, that together we will be able to deal with issues of protests, which in the main often end up in the destruction of essential infrastructure. So we would really appreciate, from a policing point of view, if communities out there can stop, distracting essential infrastructure like traffic lights, libraries, schools, roads, whilst they are demanding additional services to be provided to them. So we hope with continuous engagement, a lot will be achieved and there will be peaceful coexistence amongst our communities and the police. I thank you.
Thank you, Major General Asenang, for the informative presentation. I second you in your statement of discouraging community members to destroy properties during service delivery, demonstration, and protest. Really, we are putting a burden somewhere to the state by destroying the little services that we are having. I also strongly agree with you that local government officials need to communicate with community members, at least inform them of all the challenges that they are encountering in delivering services to avoid or alleviate violent service delivery protest. Our next speaker is Ms. nwu-pukke, who's a community leader and a provincial secretariat of police at the Department of Community Safety and Transport Management. Over to you, Ms. Nam.
Let me appreciate the invite and firstly indicate that I'm sincerely humbled for participating in this high-level debate about public protests associated with service delivery in the province of the Northwest. The topic is broad and will require time for us to really get into the intense discussion and the debate. But I think that the information is available. There's a lot of literature and analysis and books that have been written previously about the escalating extent of public protests, not only in the Northwest Province, but in South Africa in general. South Africa is experiencing the growth in number in terms of your public protests, which is a matter that requires that all of the institutions, government, civil society, NGOs, entities, private sector, we work together in not only addressing the question why, but in providing solutions to the challenges that are facing our people on the ground. I will not venture into bringing the statistical analysis because the South African Police, together with the Statistics South Africa and other bodies, are responsible for collation of data and collation of statistics. It's also analyzed by the same institutions, and then it's provided to government to utilize to enhance planning and ensure that there is sufficient intervention mechanisms that are put in place to respond to that. The Department of Community Safety in the Northwest Province is responsible for two functions. The first function is that of public transport, which is responsible for public transport in general, whether it's learner transport, whether it's scholar, whether it's the public and any other infrastructure of transport that we're dealing with. The second component is responsible for crime prevention and partnerships, and as well as ensuring that there is sufficient oversight or effective oversight that is exercised to ensure that the South African police services do exactly what they are required. So there are various legislative mandates and policies that are guiding the work of the Secretariat. We work with a lot of stakeholders and a lot of institutions in all spheres of government to bring together for the common goal of ensuring that the communities are and the communities feel safe. We do that in various levels, and I think today we will not get into the actual detail of how we do that, but we'll touch on some of the elements that guides the work that we're doing as the Secretariat. The public protests and service delivery, both of which are key because you find them in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. People have got the rights that have been accorded to by the Constitution. People have a right to protest, people have a right to demonstrate their dissatisfaction, but the Constitution also places responsibilities on citizens, on governments, on civil society in general, on how these rights must be exercised. And I think the reason why we are gathered today is the proliferation or the emergence or the continuation of communities engaging in public protest in a violent manner. Communities, whether organized or unorganized, displaying their dissatisfaction from issues of basic services to issues of communication, leadership, and any other matter that affects them. Realizing where we come from as South Africa, we know that we come from an era where communities were mobilized. So mobilization of communities is an easy thing in South Africa. It's something that is done with ease. What we need to guard against and what we ought to be looking for is what is it that communities are organized to do? And how are these communities are organized to do what they are organized to do? And who are the people that are driving the mobilization of communities into any matter, and whether they are using facts or whether they are using fiction or whether they are thumb-sucking the truth, the reality of the matter is that all of those things lie on three critical issues. The first issue is leadership. There is evidence in South Africa, and we all acknowledge at one point or the other that leadership has to step forward. Not only leadership in the form of being nominated or appointed or elected into office, but leadership in the form of assuming your complete role in providing society with a direction, being accountable to society, providing society with feedback, and ensuring that society understands and works with you in any projects or programs that are aimed at empowering their lives as a society. The second issue that we also need to realize, and in the back of our minds, we must never forget. The matrix is that there will always be wants and needs which are much greater than the resources that any country at any given point may have or will have. Now, the type of resources that a government or a society or a state could amass and put together is always not sufficient given the kind of needs and the kind of wants that people would have. Because when we talk about citizens, we're talking individual households, we're talking communities, we're talking institutions. So if you put together the needs of all of those categories or the cohorts of people that we're talking about, you realize that not everything can be done in a split of a second, which is why government has put systems in place for integrated planning or planning that must be followed, or planning that goes along with the resources for the planning that we've done. In government, there's something that we call a strategic plan over an MTF period of 5 years, but then you have annual plans that are linked to that strategic plan, which are activities that we're saying, I'm gonna do this year, and I need this much for that money. And that money is allocated or dispersed to you, whether as a government or as a department, to be able to achieve those goals. And what we've seen over the years is that our planning is not necessarily linking with the type of output that we are putting out there. The evidence of the Auditor General's reports across all spheres of government, institutions, and society in general indicates that there is a gap in terms of what we say we're going to do and what we do. But what is critical is that money is being utilized. The entire budget is spent on a yearly basis. But if you tick the boxes to say, we said we're going to do this, was that money utilized for that? No, it was not. Because in the course, once we plan, there could be issues of us leaving out the rest of the communities that needs to plan with us. Now, our planning must not be top-bottom approach, it must be bottom to top approach. The community needs must inform what government does. And once the government has realized what the communities need through IDPs, through planning documents, we then have to go back to the communities and say, you've requested 5 things, we can only do 2. Do you agree with us? Which of the 2 issues of the 5 you think we can do this year? So we've taken away a participatory democracy element. Now we promise people and they understand. When we're expected to deliver, we're not in a position to do so because we run short of not going back, not providing feedback, not taking our communities along. And that's one part of why our communities are up in arms against us. The third element that we need to deal with is the kind of services that we're providing to our communities. Where money has been spent and there's evidence of a service that has been provided, the service quality is extremely poor. In no time, that quality or that service is undermined by the eruption of consequences of shabby work, whether being it in the housing, whether being in the roads, whether being it in any other form of work that government does take out. So it goes back to the type of leadership that we have, either at a political level or at an administrative level, which we all acknowledge that it's something that we've looked into and we've acknowledged that there is a gap in terms of those issues that we're talking about. The fourth element is that the expectation, we need to learn to manage the expectation of communities. Whilst we make promises and we don't fulfill them, whilst we are not planning together with our communities and we have taken away the participatory right of communities in a participatory democracy, whilst we are spending money and there is no quality evidence to show for it, we also need to be able as government to have the capacity to manage expectation from communities. And the reason why I'm talking about managing expectation is that every time, because of the many needs and the limited resources, communities will rise up and demand certain things. We need to learn as the leadership that we don't have to promise on the spur of the moment because we're under pressure. That, oh, no, it's fine, we're going to do that. Knowing exactly that it's not possible, it's not in the plan, there is no budget for it, and there's nothing that we're going to be doing. I think we need to go back and intensify engagements with communities so that communities, we make them aware and we make them understand that it's fine, you can call for this, you can do that, but it's not gonna be this year or next year. Let's look into the 3rd year or the 4th year where we are able to. So we are sitting with a lot of promises and commitments which are not being fulfilled. And that's one area that angers communities. We're also sitting with basic services that communities, every time they pay their rates and taxes, we say, we're going to do them. And we hardly do, we hardly improve. And where we are improving, the quality remains poor. There are issues of inherent underdevelopment, inherent poverty, and inherent high levels of unemployment. Not only are they starting now, I think the skewed way of how we planned pre the democratic dispensation has placed enormous pressure on the government to deliver quickly. And in 26 years, we can count that it's fine, government has done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you look into what government has done against the budget that was utilized and the quality of work that we've put out, we need to be able to say, but what went wrong? And these are the issues that actually say to, that makes our people to say, corruption and service delivery has actually, a lack of service delivery has actually crippled the kind of work that we're expecting from you. So in managing those expectations, the expectations are growing, the budget is diminishing, the limited budget we have in our disposal, which has diminished over the years, we're not able to show portfolio of evidence that good work is happening. What we are seeing in terms of our analysis as communities are talking to us every day, the communities are insinuating or alleging that we don't see services, but we see the people entrusted with the obligation to service us. They're living large. Their lifestyle has changed. They now have massive accumulation of things that we know they can't afford. How is it happening? And I think if all of us can answer that question, we will be at least a step closer into saying what needs to be done, what went wrong, what type of a leadership and administration in government that we're having, public servants, what type of public representatives are we bringing in? Does it mean that what the people are seeing, they are now demanding? Because if they assume that I have 50,000 in my pocket and I'm used to giving them 10 rands, they will come back for more because they think that if I'm able to give them 10 rands for free, I could still give them 3,000 for free. And if I refuse or I fail to do it, it's the mindset. It's the kind of things that we are doing to try and manage the expectation. I think we're going the all wrong way in managing that expectation. In managing the expectation, we need to do what is right. Engage, put the facts on the table, account to communities, make them decide. Don't decide for them. If you have a budget of 100,000 rand and they need water, they need electricity, and you can only do one, ask them, what is it that comes first? We can only do one. What is it that you think we should be doing? And manage and coordinate them to be able to give you the answer that they deserve. The societal behavior has been influenced by a number of issues, one of which I've just mentioned now. The assumption that those that are in public leadership, those that are public servants, they have money because they are living a bigger life than what they can afford or what they earn. So we need to be able to say to them, that societal behavior, it is us that probably started it. How do we collectively, together with them, begin to go back so that they don't revolt against the government that they've elected. They don't come back and say to government, we're not taking no for an answer. We know money is there because of how we portray that there is money in what we are doing. The role that we are playing as the civilian secretariat in the department is that we oversight the SAPs. And often we're part of intervention mechanisms with the SAPs where relationships between communities and the SAPs have been broken. The communities will expect SAPs to act more than what is required. But the role of the SAPs primarily and fundamentally is to make sure that there's law and order. Where the communities are up in arms, where public protests are recorded, where violent protests are done, there's one of the 3 or 4 elements of intervention. The first intervention is for the police to ensure that they bring law and order, they stabilize the environment. Once the environment is stabilized, it must be handed over to the second stakeholder, which is government or leadership, to begin processes of ensuring that the stability created by the SAPs is sustained and actually the matters are resolved. And once those matters are resolved, then you'll have a greater, stronger working relationship with communities. And in stabilizing the communities, the SAPs will not necessarily use one element. They would analyze the situation, they would look into the nature of the protest and begin to bring what is required as an intervention mechanism at that point. So it's not a one size fits all. It's the kind of display from the communities that the SAPs is confronted with. And unfortunately, the rights that we have a right to protest, but that right comes with enormous responsibility. Once we become violent and we are found in the act, the police have got no choice but to act decisively. We don't expect them to negotiate the law. We expect them to say to communities, this is the choice that you've made, and these are the obligations that you had. You failed on your obligations, now we are moving in. So once that happens, and this is the part where communities will expect that there must be negotiation. No, our cost was genuine. The municipality has promised that they'll give us water. Yes, we know, but the municipality never sent you to come and burn a school because you want water. Burning a school is not acceptable. We will not condone it, and it should not be allowed. The generic findings that we have generally arise on all of the issues that we've spoken about earlier. The community protests, being peaceful or violent in particular, they place a burden of responsibility on the police. Because even when the police are aware of what is confronting communities, and they probably have an analysis based on what they would have warned government about before, that we are aware that this community is going to protest. Please intervene because this thing is coming. They want this, they want that. Our inability to swiftly move and assist them is creating a burden on the limited resources that the SAPS has. The question that we need to answer is, what do we need to do? There are about 6 issues that we've set aside as the oversight body. And one of the key issues is that the leadership and accountability needs to be re-looked into. The type of leaders that we elect or send into office, the commitment that they display, the resource at the disposal of the state should be utilized prudently, and politicians or political leadership or our MECs and premiers and ministers needs to take full responsibility of their political role in the offices that they occupy. They shouldn't trust or rely only on what the administration is saying. They need to know what do they have to do to ensure that administration does exactly what has been promised and they carry out. They need to check the systems that are in place internally. They need to check the early warning systems put in place in every aspect of what is contained in their operational plan, in their annual performance plan at a municipal level and all other levels. They also need to ensure that governance structures that have been put in place to ensure that we strengthen collaboration and we place communities at the center of participation in the government of the people. Whether that government is who, it becomes important that we need to create space for communities to participate, and that needs to be strengthened. All the systems, all the governance structures and forums, all civil society organizations, they need to be brought back into the fold. Our councillors are expected to account to their various wards at various levels on a monthly basis. There are ward committees, you don't know whether they are functional or not. And you don't know whether they are objective enough to stand up against what is wrong. So we need to look into what type of a leadership are we electing into office and whether that leadership is accountable or not. Where appointments must be based on capacity, they must be based on skill, irrespective of political affiliation, irrespective of orientation. We need to be able to bring women into the fold where they are capacitated. Let's give them the opportunity to do so. Consequence management must happen. If I'm a non-performer and I'm earning, what is it that government is paying me for? So there are a lot of public servants and public representatives who are paid for by a state, and they've got nothing to show on what they're doing on a daily basis. They come to sporadically, they respond sporadically. Some are not even anywhere near their offices. We need to begin to say, even where you have police officers or you have correctional services officers or you have an HOD who's not performing, there must be consequence management. We need to be able, those that are found to could have participated in the corrupt activities, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, let's bring them on board. There must be systems in place to ensure that consequence management is realized and people know that this is not inherently my position, but I need to work hard for it and I need to show something for it. We need to reorientate state machinery. Reorientation of state machinery means that there needs to be a culture of work that we bring back into the public service. There needs to be a culture of honesty. There needs to be a culture of service that our communities are. If you find half the time, some of the people, when they protest, they tell you that, no, we were at the clinic and the nurses were sitting there, they were eating for 3 hours and we had to wait. What measures can we put in place so that everybody must enjoy eating at work, but it must be done in such a way that it does not disrupt the service, because that's what Batupili principles are saying. We need to educate our society. We need to liberate society and give them possibly through a curriculum, if I were to think loud, develop the curriculum teaching our communities what are the recourse in every step of governance. If you demand this and it doesn't happen, what do you have to do? If you do this, what do you have to do? Before you can march, before you can engage in violent protest, what are the things that you need to exhaust so that you have evidence, even when you are taken to court, that we've tried everything by the book. So we need to re-educate our communities. We need to empower them because we need them to participate. So that reorientation or educating society is extremely important on our part. We need to support community structures. Support them in the sense that you've got NPIs, non-profit institutions across South Africa that are closer to communities where we are, that are the ears and the eyes of government. They are ideological being, they are mandates, they are patriotism to South Africa. It needs to be supported. I've seen many institutions and many NGOs who tell you that we've tried every Don government just to give them a plan for them to fund. Nobody wants to listen. Why are you not listening? Why are we not listening to our communities? So those are some of the things that we've set aside to say, maybe if we change our attitude towards what is our obligation in serving the people of South Africa, we may find solutions to the eruption, the destruction of property, the violent nature of our people. We need to bring programs that deals with the societal well-being in general, because we just came from one era, we zoomed into the next era of democracy, and we assumed that what we did then will be appropriate for now. No, it doesn't work. All of us needs to sit together and say, let's correct, and correction means accountability, leadership, support, integration, as the president is always there. We love the district development model. If we can only focus on that, because it has got potential to unleash economic potentials in various districts, it has got potential to create jobs and absorb the many unemployed young people, some of whom are graduates, some of whom missed an opportunity to go to school. We can't just say, let them stay at home. We need to give them something. And it has worked. We've seen in the security sector. We have patrollers. We have people who give their time to work together with the SAPs in ensuring that communities are safe. Where we've appointed patrollers, the streets become less crime invested. So it tells you, once people's energies are redirected to something that earns them a salary, that gives them their well-being back, we are likely to see the levels of public protest. We are likely to see people understanding what service delivery is all about. But we need change. We need that change, and that change must be about accountability and our leadership at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Na, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Malitekido Marco, who is a director at the Office of the Premier. Dr. Marco had worked as a lecturer at Tia College of Education, Bunamedi College of Education, Northwest-University Department of Psychology. He has also worked as a clinical psychologist for National Council for Correctional Services. He's an advisory board member to the Minister of Correctional Services. He was a municipal manager at Rustenburg Local Municipality. Over to you, Dr. Marco.
Good day, good day, colleagues. We have been invited here to make a presentation on lack of service delivery and violent protest, community observations and working towards improved service delivery. My identity, Dr. M.K. Marco, Director, Office of the Premier. Service Delivery Monitoring and Intervention, that is our unit. Office of the Premier appreciates the invite to present here and to be here in these discussions, lack of service delivery and violent protests. The topic by itself presupposes that there is a direct correlation between lack of service delivery and violent protests. The office further appreciates this initiative by the university to hold hands with government. Now, among other functions, the Office of the Premier is tasked with the monitoring of service delivery and doing interventions where necessary in the entire province. At the beginning of every 5 years, the South African government enters into a contract with its citizens. This happens during the national elections or during the municipal elections. Next. The citizens vote for the party of their choice. Then the winning party forms government. Then a strategic plan is produced. In respect of the municipality, this is called IDP, Integrated Development Plan. This document must inform government about needs of the communities and their priorities, which community needs must be attended to first. These are generally known as service delivery needs for the community. We do acknowledge at the onset, as the Office of the Premier, that there are serious challenges when it comes to service delivery. Therefore, strengthening of systems must be very strong at this level within municipalities. Municipalities are at the cold phase of service delivery. My approach with regards to this topic has been a medical or a psychomedical one, making a diagnosis. This leads me to articulate factors that are attributable to service delivery challenges. Before solving any problems, it is standard practice to examine the root cause and therefore determine why the problem exists. The very first one would be inability to implement by a government, power relations that exist, corruption that is rampant, lack of skills that we see, incompetency as we have observed, leadership problems, silo mentality, political power struggles. Ward councillors would be one of the topics that we shall be looking at as well. With regards to inability to implement, after the drafting of the strategies and the implementation plans by government departments, the next logical thing to do is to implement those plans. Obviously, those plans go along and hand in hand with the budgets, but those budgets would have been there, plans are there. Now, why not implement? Many a times, this component is a problem. Officials find it difficult to implement, probably due to a variety of reasons. Therefore, it is not a single factor situation when it comes to the issue of implementation. Power relations, the power relation factor, both in the community and in the workplace, cannot be undermined. In the community, this relates to councillors feeling that they must consolidate power by being against other community structures and mobilize against such perceived threats. At times, a community member complains of lack of service delivery. When it is a councillor, then she now ignores those issues, as one of the speakers has indicated about the promises that councillors would make from time to time. In workplaces, the administration officials may also feel threatened, and as a consequence, service delivery suffers. Since the dawn of democracy, there has been an outcry about corruption. It has become a pandemic in later years. It is common cause that Where corruption festers, service delivery suffers. Infrastructure development, roads, housing, municipalities, education, health, all of these become victims of corruption. The other topic that I indicated that we'll look at is lack of skills themselves. I'm glad that the university is here as the fountain of knowledge and skills development. They've got to assist a great deal. There has been a perception over the years, for the past 25 years, that universities have been in a cocoon, not wanting anything to do with government. They have been isolated. I don't know whether there was Corona at the time or not, but they have been isolated, and that perception still exists. But we are very happy now that the university is here and is holding hands with government. There is a direct correlation between poor or lack of service delivery and skills development, I might add. If implementers of service delivery programs are not sufficiently skilled, then they would not be able to deliver. The winning formula is if there is constant and consistent upskilling, then service delivery would happen. While the workplace skills plans, the WSP, are part of the annual performance plans referred to as APPs in the HR units of government departments, it is crucial that such training matches the job an employee is doing. Otherwise, it becomes a futile exercise. Incompetence. Incompetency refers to lack of capacity or ability to execute given tasks. No capacity, no service delivery, period. Such an individual should have been exposed to an assessment of some kind that shows gaps in his abilities. And such a gap can be closed by training and development. Then we do have next leadership problems. This is another elephant in the room. This is the ability to lead colleagues to a common objective, and in this regard, service delivery. There is an observed poor leadership where service delivery exists. Leadership should require an individual, or would require an individual to visualize the outcome of any project or program long before they are achieved. There is also, next one, the silo mentality. One government, one constituency, but different departments who are not talking to one another. There is no integrated planning by these various departments. You'd find the Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Local Government doing a different plan from the one of Public Works, from the one of Health, from the one of Department of Education, and at the end of the day, despite scarce resources that we have, their plans don't talk to one another. Consequently, there is the suffering of service delivery. This poor planning obviously leads to poor execution. Then we do have another point of political power struggles. While it is expected and accepted that inter-party political power struggles do exist, as these tend to expedite service delivery. But the problem is intra-political power struggles. These are worse as they stall service delivery. Decisions in legislature or in council are difficult to be taken, and therefore service delivery suffers. Another component is the one of councillors. Councillors are supposed to intervene in the case of service delivery needs in the wards. In later years, some councillors in the country are not doing this task. Legislation prescribes that every month community meetings must be held, but we can check with everyone when was this done last. The councillors are no longer having these kind of meetings. We don't know what are the reasons. These kind of meetings would inform the councillors about community needs. Where there are no community meetings, service delivery suffers. All of these lead to what is referred to as a violent protest. While protests are part of the democratic dispensation, violent protests are discouraged from all angles. However, much aggrieved citizens can be violent because they have been promised with no service delivery. Note that the very buildings and facilities that are being destroyed by these communities belong to the same communities. They don't belong to other people elsewhere. Violent protest is the language that was used against the apartheid government in the years gone by. With the advent of the new dispensation, the liberation movement and consequently government did not win off its citizens from this practice. And therefore, we must accept as a result that where service delivery is happening, there is no violent protest. Question: why is there no peaceful protest? Well, the answer is difficult when it comes to this one, why there is no peaceful protest. Another question: why banning clinic or stopping children from attending school when the source of grief is roads? Answer: emotions impair one's judgment. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Marco, for unpacking some of the causes of service delivery protests, which end up being violent in some instances, and for highlighting the role of the ward councillors, which is not executed. This role is for ward councillors to conduct ward meetings on a monthly basis. Ward councillors are regarded as vehicles of service delivery. And really, if these service delivery problems can be identified in a ward level, I think we cannot see this high rate of violent service delivery protest. Our next speaker is Mr. Lebogang Butlabedi from Rise and Shine Development Center, which is a non-profit organization.
Good day, everyone. I'm going to talk about lack of service delivery and violent protest that people in our different communities get involved in. First thing, I'm going to outline some of the things that people talk about when they say, they give the reasons why do they get involved in violent protest. Normally in the communities that we work in as an NPO, people will outline reasons that they become involved in violent protest because they feel like the government is not listening to them. They feel like things that they need, like water, clinics, and schools, the government is not providing for them. And they end up being involved in violent protest because they think it's the only solution to them so that the government can listen to them. And the other thing about why people do they get involved in violent protest is because they feel like most of their councillors in from their different areas, they are not there to serve them. They are there just to make money, and they don't attend meetings, and they don't take what they are saying in the meetings seriously. Then after they disappear, they only become visible to them when they and after that, they don't come back to them and give them feedbacks about all the challenges that they raised in different meetings. So I think for people to stop being involved in violent protest, they must be educated about the rights that they have when they march or they protest. They must be educated about what right do they have and the responsibilities that goes along with the rights that they have. Because most of young people, they just protest, and you'll find that other young people, they just protest without knowing if they do something wrong, like burning schools, they can go to jail for a long time. And the most important thing that the government can do is to make them aware about the channels that they can go if they want to raise out the challenges that they have.
Thank you, Mr. Mutlabedi, for your presentation and your appeal that community members need to be educated on the consequences again of destroying properties. This is a bad habit indeed, because at the end of the day, communities destroy the little that they have. And at the end of the day, they don't have any services. On the part of ward councillors, Dr. Marco had made an appeal also that councillors must conduct monthly meetings. And councillors must be visible to community members. Mr. Mutlabedi, you are right. They mustn't be there to earn salaries. They are the vehicles of service delivery. Our next speaker is Ms. Kilebogile Kusimile from Rise and Shine Development Center.
Hi everyone, I'm Kilebogile Kusimile from Rise and Shine Development Center. It's a non-profit organization based in Ramosadi village in Mahikeng. Rise and Shine is an organization that works with crime prevention during school days and also doing life skills at schools. As the CSOs, we have challenges in our communities because we don't get enough support in different departments. Sometimes we go for asking for funds, they don't get back to us. And the other thing is our councillors in our community. They know about us, they don't give us the support that we need. And the other thing is they used to invite us to the meetings and go promise us things like that they don't get back to us. And we have the challenge in our communities. We don't have roads, electricity, house. So the only thing that I could like to see is our government to give back to the communities. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kusimile, for outlining your challenges that are currently hampering your center on the part of ward councillors. They should be working together with you because you are having a common key role here of serving the communities in your wards. And on the part of government, government should be financially assisting you because you are playing a crucial role of dealing with criminal cases and protection of school kids. This is something that really is needed in our country. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard our presenters or speakers, and now it's time for questions and answers. So the questions have been posed to the following people who will be coming, or following presenters who will be coming and answer them. The first presenter or person responsible for answering the posed question will be Dr. Marco, followed by Major General Asaneng and Prof. Milo.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for affording me this opportunity to come and respond to the questions posed by this membership. The very first question was posed by Dr. Lusanda on the question of protests, that there is a perception, indeed reality, from your analysis and research, that a lot of them are political and a lot of them are instigated. I want to agree with that. It would seem as if there is a game that is being played in that arena. Now, the Office of the Premier, you asked what it is that the Office of the Premier think will bring an end to that kind of a situation, which leads ultimately to the destruction of property. The response thereto is to keep on engaging the councillors, because when we start talking politics, we start with the councillors because they are the ones that must deliver service at the end of the day after being chosen by communities. Is to keep on engaging municipalities through the office of the executive mayor, through the office of the speaker, who is necessarily in control of the councillors themselves. Professor Sillo spoke of on the issues of training, that at the end of the day, it becomes business as usual. People go back to their workspaces. What can be done? Indeed, I must confirm, Prof, that the Ikatisong School of Governance is there as an independent institution that is supposed to be doing what it's supposed to be doing, but it has not delivered, as you might have noticed in the AG's report and various other reports in the public sector, that even some of they are having challenges there. I think as the Office of the Premier, this will also be brought up to the School of Governance, Ikatisong, to say the school is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, because what Prof was saying, it should assist to measure whether the impact of the training that may have been received, whether how relevant is that training? And the school does not seem to have done that. It's something which needs to be followed up. On another note, Prof made mention of cadre deployment. I think Prof was actually saying cadre deployment. I agree with Prof 100%. Cadre deployment, while it is necessary, it must be with people, must be done with people who are capable, who've got skill, who've got qualifications, who are competent. And as such, this is where we need the university in terms of that kind of partnership. Hence, over and over again, I will emphasize how glad I am that the university has initiated these kinds of dialogues and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the facilitator. The question that was put to me by Dr. Jude is whether, as the South African Police Service, are we collaborating or working with the NPO in addressing issues of crime? In response to the question, I want to maybe take a little bit of a background understanding. We should remember that the South African Police Service was established in 1995 after the dawn of democracy. And in establishing the South African Police Service, the then police forces of the old republic, as well as the police forces of the homelands and independent states, were merged. And the founding fathers saw it fit that the policing agency that should be established during the dawn of democracy must be a service-oriented type of policing agency. And in order to achieve that, it became imperative that the Constitution and the South African Police Service Act should be crafted in such a way that it makes provision not only for collaborative policing, but also partnership policing. That is why you will realize that one of the key national policies of the South African Police Service is the establishment of community policing structures. Therefore, as a police agency or service, we are always encouraging communities, government departments, and other structures to partner with the South African Police Service, not as junior partners, because we believe that the prevention of crime is not the sole responsibility of the police. That being informed by the fact that crime is caused by socio-economic factors, and therefore policing alone will not be the panacea to address socio-economic challenges that are there, some of which leads to crime. Therefore, I would encourage Arise and Shine, like all other NPOs, community-based organizations, to form part and parcel of their community policing structures, because we are doing this to ensure that these structures are also not hijacked by criminal elements, because we have seen that sometimes when people who are members of these structures are not properly vetted, criminals come there and then very sensitive community-related safety and security issues are discussed. We have taken note as the SAPS of the sterling work that is done by Arise and Shine. And my advice would be for them to go to their local police station, in this instance, Mabato, Mafikeng, and Lomanyane, which are operating in the greater Mafikeng, and make sure that their members are part and parcel of the community policing structures. And then we do also provide the necessary levels of training to NBOs, assist them. With the launch of the National Community Policing Strategy, we have even launched what we call the Community in Blue concept, where we train community members or members of the community in crime prevention strategies and tactics. So that would be my response to the first question. Regarding the second question posed by Mekoni, as to whether do we engage with COCTA. In my presentation this morning, I clearly pointed out that as the South African Police Service, we have even developed a standard operating procedure or National Instruction 4 of 2014, which deals with issues relating to protests in general, not necessarily violent protests. And when one looks at paragraph 5 of this standard operating procedure or national instruction, it propagates for a proactive, consultative, collaborative approach. What it requires, or it places an obligation on all of our station commanders that through our crime intelligence component, through our partners like community policing forums, we should identify what I earlier referred to as flashpoints, where, for example, there are bottlenecks in terms of service delivery. Then what we do is, as soon as we realize, for example, that a particular community has been without water for a very long time, we as the South African Police Service, through the Department of Community Safety and Transport Management, we make sure that we send a report, an intelligence threat report, to the relevant MEC or the Office of the Premier, where we are warning that should the situation persist or remain unresolved, the likelihood of a violent eruption is there. So we are not only dealing with this, because why we decided to adopt this proactive approach to dealing with issues is because we have realized that deploying limited police resources to address issues of lack of or poor service delivery, it's a serious core object diversion for us. That is why we are encouraging and talking not only to government departments, but even in the labor sector, because we have seen also where, people, would embark on violent labor protests. So from a policing point of view, it is part and parcel of the training that we are giving to our members. It is part and parcel of our standard operating procedure. Relating to the issue again that was raised of collaboration, as well as the issue that was raised by Dr. Jude about whether is it just a question of people not understanding, or is it lack of training? We have done a thorough analysis as the South African Police Service. We have observed like I have earlier indicated, that some of the protests, violent protests, actually the majority of the proponents or people involved, you'll find that it is in the main young children who are used to commit these type of violent protests. And when you listen to the issues that are supposed to be or contentious issues, you will realize that children are supposed to be in school, for instance, and they will be the ones who are used to block roads, stone passing motorists, and all these things. So, but at the end of the day, you realize that they themselves know that even after engaging in these violent protests, in the main, it is the limited essential infrastructure that gets destroyed, but the problem remain unresolved. So that is why we, as the SAPS, want to engage and say to government that we believe the answer after this diagnosis that has been done really lies first in consequence management. Because like Dr. Marco was saying, you'll find that some of these are intra-political. You'll find that a ward councillor and opponents belong to the same party, and the other one is instigating violence against the opponent. But in the main, even after evidence has been provided that this particular individual is the instigator, there are no consequence management in terms of intra-party disciplinary processes. But also what is of crucial importance is that even where the people who are engaged in violent protests are arrested, it is very rare that they are prosecuted and found guilty. Where they are found guilty, in the main, the sentences that are imposed are not of a deterrent nature. So it will be very, very important in our view as the South African Police Service that going forward, once people can know that when they engage in this kind of behavior, it will send a very strong message, it will give an example, then we believe that it will lead. I may just cite an example of the hashtag Fees Must Fall strikes that we saw across the country. It is now common cause that one of the leaders of that movement was seen blatantly, openly touching a police vehicle. He was brought before the courts, sentenced and found guilty. Instead of dealing with that, then the narrative and the message that was put out there was that no, this particular individual was doing what is acceptable, therefore it is unacceptable for him to have been prosecuted. For then it needs political will so that when we deal with this type of behavior or this type of conduct, then people should know that you go out, damage essential infrastructure, damage properties, you will be arrested, prosecuted, and the law will be allowed to take its course. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm going to be responding to a question that was raised by Dr. Lusanda Juta. It's a question whether communities are aware of regulations, whether they're destroying property because they are frustrated, or because perhaps it's a lack of education. And I think my predecessor also attempted to make a comment to that effect as well. But you know, with a demonstration, you need to look at the pre-arrangements that are made for that demonstration. And then you also have to look at what happens during the demonstration itself. Now, you would notice that in terms of procedures, perhaps people may not know fully what is it that they have to do. Because one morning you wake up and then there is a protest. The road is blocked. The police also don't even know that there was going to be a protest, because that one was not properly arranged. Procedures were not followed. Now, you may have a protest where procedures were followed, and organizers have got good intentions. But unfortunately, protests sometimes are hijacked. As you march towards town, the homeless people, street kids, they see a party going on, they join. Now the next shop becomes a victim. The organizers had a good intention, but some people hijacked. We also need to look at mob psychology. Sometimes people have got good intention, but when they meet as a group, mob psychology says that people lose themselves in a group and they feel more powerful than when they were acting alone. And they start throwing stones. So it's not an issue that you can answer with a yes or no. Education is there because people know that there are consequences. If you do something wrong, you're going to be arrested. But perhaps they do not know more about the procedures that they need to follow. Now, I also need to comment on what the representative of the Office of the Premier said regarding training as well as incompetence. We need to re-look at how we do our training. Before you go for training, there must be some kind of assessment so that we can know at what level are you. What is it that you don't know? Because we cannot take you for training with assumptions. We must know that exactly this is what you can do. And when you come back again, there must be assessment again so that we can check what is it that you have gained from the training. We are applying the Labor Relations Act in the public sector as well as in the private sector. But the public sector seems to be dragging its feet in terms of dealing with people who are incompetent. In the private sector, companies are after profit. If you can't deliver, you're out. In the public sector, we're also dealing with the agency of service delivery. And therefore, we should stop tolerating people who are incompetent. We should deal with them. And in fact, if you look at legislation, the Public Service Act, you look at the Labor Relations Act, there are different ways of having to deal with people who are incompetent. First, you need to train, reskill them, move them around, and when all fails, then you have to make sure that you institute proceedings to get these people out of the system. Thank you.
Well, my answer to the question that was asked by Mama Connie Lokhodi was, do we go back to the community and ask them if the problem they had was solved after banning the properties that they had? The answers that we get from the community is no. After banning the properties that they had, they are left with more frustrations, they are left with more challenges. Example, they had a clinic before because they wanted tar road or they wanted water delivery in their community. They banned the clinic. Then after the strikes, they are left with more problems. They have nowhere to go if they need help from Department of Health, if they need any help from the clinic. And what we noticed after going back to people after the strikes, we noticed that some of those people who were involved in those violence as protests are young people. And those young people, the things that they destroy are the things that they need more than what they wanted for that strike. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for answering the posed questions. We have come to the end of our discussion or session, and I'm going to call upon Dr. Juta to give us a vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr. Juta.
Good day to ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, and to everyone that is here. I would like to thank the University of Northwest for organizing this dialogue for us to come engage with the Premier's Office, SAPS, as us also as academics, with the NGO that is within the space of Mabato. This discussion has improved our understanding of why communities are just why people are destroying their properties when they are striking. Our wish is that when now strikes are taking place, the community members that are involved in those, the organizers, do take into consideration the responsibility and also the outcomes. They must also emphasize the need for people that are involved to know why the strike is taking place, why we should not destroy our properties that are already existing, because it takes, or it makes a delay to government to provide the particular service that people are asking for, because they have to go back and provide the one that has been destroyed. In saying so, thanks to Prof. Melo for your discussion or dialogue. Thanks to the General Aseneng. Okay, thanks to Ms. Nikki Wenam and also Dr. Marco, and also the facilitator, Dr. Obisi, and also the NPO that has joined us. Thank you.